agenda for today's meeting is we will be talking what is qualitative research and how it is different from other researches, mainly quantitative, and what are the its main approaches and principal methods of data collection. But before I go any further, I would like to talk about netiquettes. And would you like to talk about them, Gohar, or do you want me to continue?
Sure, ma'am. Am I audible?
Haha, you are. Put your voice a bit louder.
Okay. Hello, everyone. You're all requested to please rename your Zoom accounts to the name of your university and then your name. As you can see, I have named my name as FCCU/GoharaU, and for the people who are outside from FCCU, you are also requested to rename your names. And you are all requested to please turn off your video so that you do not face any bandwidth issues. And you will be muted by the host. And you are basically to mention your questions and all your issues and queries in the Zoom chat, and we respond to that at the end of the session. And the session will be recorded, and we will be sharing the recorded video with you within 2 to 3 days. Over to you, Dr. Sana.
Thank you, Gohar. Gohar is our manager at Center of Learning and Teaching, and I am also at Center of Learning and Teaching. Very briefly, Sara is an unusual researcher, academic, and she is a pride for us at Forman Christian College. She's a professor in the Department of Sociology. She's also the chairperson of the department. She has served in the University of Punjab, in Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, and she did her BS honors from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and then her MPhil and PhD in Institute of Social Cultural Studies, University of Punjab. She has already at this young age published 28 research papers in the areas of public health and social policy. And she's authored to 2 books published by Oxford University Press and Springer. She's right now working on quite a few research projects. And like I said, the beauty about her projects is they are all contextual, and she looks at the social, cultural, economic aspects of the country. So over to you, Sara.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roxana. Very kind of you. I've just quickly opened this, the feedback from registrants, just to give you all the respect that I've tried to cover all of these elements. So at points, if it seems too much or meandering, the presentation, it's only because I'm just trying to satisfy everybody's questions as much as possible. So I'm moving into the presentation, and I hope you can see the PowerPoint mode. Go ahead.
Yes.
And other slides moving back and forth?
Yes, they are.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you, everybody. We'll start because there's a lot to cover. At the same time, I don't really mind if anybody has a pressing question which they can't hold for the end of the session. And if you raise your hands and if Gohar can support me, I'm happy to stop and answer those questions. So these are all the elements that we'll be covering today. I'm starting a little bit backwards, which was a question from participants that why, when the whole point of doing research obviously is to get it published, to disseminate it. And can the life sciences and the medical sciences publish qualitative research? And the answer is yes, 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 100%. Luckily enough, I'm in a position to share a recent publication of mine. This is a collaboration between, you can see on your screen, a medical doctor, a surgeon, myself from sociology and public health, a psychologist, that's Dr. Nudra Malik, and Florian Fisher, who's a public health expert. So we all got together and we did this qualitative research. And another question from another participant was, well, please go take us through the reviewer comments and how you actually get material published. So I'm going to try to cover some of those elements now in 1 or 2 minutes, and then go back into the basics of what this whole presentation is about. And you can see that we've actually the agenda for this research was to qualitatively interview operating department practitioners. And we believe that the research objective at the time of the coronavirus pandemic was to understand their lived experiences in the closed operation theater and what their feedback and recommendations would be with regards to, number one, improving the patient safety culture in the surgical unit, and also number two, how to improve patient safety, infection control and patient safety practices for the entire surgical unit, given that ODPs, operating department practitioners, are not only participating members of the surgical unit, but they are also very good witnesses. They know what the surgeon and the anesthesiologist and the nurses are doing. So we wanted to, instead of having a fixed quantitative survey, asking them questions that we had thought of or other researchers had thought of using a standardized scale or developing it ourselves, we thought it's better to use literature and create a semi-structured questionnaire and then go in and have 1 to 2 hour open-ended discussions with them and let them lead the discussion, have broad themes under infection control, patient safety practices, what's happening in the surgical theater, but then let them talk as much as possible. Now, one of the comments that we got back, so this is what I just discussed with Dr. Ruxana, that would probably constitute a separate 1 hour session or training. What kind of reviewer comments do we receive when we submit our articles, qualitative articles or quantitative, to research journals? It wasn't clear in the question by the participant if they mean generally for qualitative, for all types of research or just qualitative. But yes, in my personal opinion, the reviewer comments that come back for qualitative research are very tricky. And I'll come to that later, as opposed to quantitative research. With quantitative research, the maximum they can say to you is that you use the wrong test, use another test. But with qualitative research, if they tell you that you did not plan this and your authenticity and your credibility is not there and you've not collected the data correctly, you cannot go back and collect the data. So you have to be very careful, and I appreciate the comment by the participant that you have to really take care of these things at proposal and pre-drafting stage and take consultation from your senior researchers and your peer and your department senior colleagues, etc., about how to manage qualitative research without compromising on the scientific element, on the reliability, and have your answers ready. You know, be the devil's advocate and just imagine what kind of questions your reviewers will ask. You can see over here that this was reviewer 2. And then, so what I've done is that with the reading material of this presentation, I've attached the reviewer comments for this particular article that was published in Science Progress. I forgot to mention that Science Progress, this journal is a life sciences journal, and it's published an article from a principal investigator who's from sociology. One recent development by Science Progress is that they recognize multidisciplinary research teams, and they don't just publish life science submissions anymore, but they encourage multidisciplinary researchers from the life sciences, medical sciences, social sciences, and even humanities coming together. Another news to share with you is that in this particular research, there wasn't anybody from the humanities, but I'm doing another research in which again we have the same type of team members from the medical sciences, life sciences, social sciences, but then we also have people from the humanities like Dr. Anna Muzammal, who's joined us in the team. And that's going to be fantastic. I'm so happy that I can share this, and hopefully I'll be able to share the findings later on when the project is done. So you can notice that the reviewer over here is trying to say, and I can't see this, so let me just minimize myself. Right. So, however, the study, so the reviewer is making a comment in red font, and my answer is here in black. The study only presents individual opinions and feelings, and there is no categorization of the answers or scaling. Now, what the reviewer is basically telling us that we've submitted a qualitative research, which is supposed to be narrating the individual's opinions and feelings, and then doing the thematic analysis and presenting the results. And then they're asking us, well, where's the categorization of the answers or the scalings? Well, we haven't used a scale. So then with in a very respectful way, we've had to answer the reviewer that this is a qualitative study. The aim is clearly outlined in the submission, in the manuscript, and then we've quoted our aim. And then we've also, if you notice, we were lucky enough to find other qualitative research from the surgical area, though it's limited, but it's growing in the last couple of years, 2020 to 20. This is only research since 2016. So we then quoted those articles and said that there's a growth, surgical research and nursing research has a lot of qualitative articles. So we hope that you'll accept this manuscript as well. And again, we can't talk too much about review comments because, maybe Dr. Sana will be happy to share a separate session related to this. So I'm moving forward. Gohar, you can see the slides moving, right?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Great. So so now we get to the basics. What is qualitative research? It's a research strategy that emphasizes words rather than quantification. So when you're looking at a qualitative research, you'll see lots of paragraphs and words and description, and vice versa. When you see quantitative research, you'll see tables and statistics and data and a lot of figures and things like that. So you can see the difference superficially. But obviously, through the course of the presentation, we'll see why this is so. There is also a lot of complexity with qualitative research. So for example, it's not just about quantification and statistical presentation in different forms. But you can see over here that even scholars from this qualitative research they're not so eager to box.
Sociology department ki head hai.
It's not so easy. Yeah, could you mute participants? Go ahead.
Done, ma'am. Ma'am, just give me a second.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Go ahead.
Yes.
Huh.
Great. So you can see that recent scholars of qualitative research also, and this is happening in the last 10 years, they don't want to box themselves. They don't want to say that we are just inductivists or just constructionists or just interpretivists. And the reason for this is because qualitative researchers use different tools, and they may also come from another background altogether. So, and this will come on another slide. For example, somebody who's been a quantitative researcher all their lives, suddenly they're working on a research project that necessitates them to approach the data collection qualitatively or through mixed methods approach. And you can see some of the diverse research methods that are used under qualitative, but quantitative researchers and mixed methods or realist researchers are also using this. Again, we'll see this on the onion slide later, just so that it becomes more rooted in our understanding. So we can be using ethnography or participant observation. We could be using qualitative interviewing, which could be certain sections of qualitative questions that are included in a quantitative questionnaire. That's what mixed method researchers do typically. They add some qualitative questions at the end of their fixed questionnaire. We could be using focus group discussions with 5 to 6 participants, and these could be repeated until you've got the data that you need. You could be using discourse analysis and conversation analysis using notes and autobiographies and secondary data. And then you could also be doing qualitative analysis of texts and documents like government reports. And then you would be doing this simultaneously, not just of qualitative data, but even of quantitative data. So maybe you're using a government report which has a lot of statistical data. Maybe you're conducting a systematic literature review which has meta-analysis data and regression data, but you're writing the report or you're summarizing the findings and developing implications and recommendations through qualitative or a narrative analysis. This will make much more sense when you read some of the attached articles that we'll be sending with this presentation later on. So move to the next slide. Can you see the next slide, Gohar? Because sometimes when you change settings,
Yes, ma'am. It's
okay, great. So you can see, and this was a question from a participant as well. Well, how do you know which direction to go in? It really depends on your research question. So let's say we're researching physicians and their work experience, or nurses and their work experience, or construction workers and their work experience. And we ask the question, which is on the left side. I hope that is your left side. It's my left side, quantitative question. So typical quantitative question will be how many physicians are currently working in private and public sectors of Pakistan, or any other professional group that you are studying. And remember that in a lot of qualitative research, when you're reading the introduction and the background in the literature review, a lot of statistics are quoted. It's necessary to give the background, to understand what the population group strength is and why it's important to conduct the research. Well, obviously, this question has to be answered quantitatively. Whenever you're trying to quote statistics for unemployment, inflation, how many people belong to a certain profession, you need quantitative data. At the same time, if a research question changes to we don't know and we don't really care about how many physicians there are, but we want to know what their experiences are in Pakistani public sector hospitals versus private sector, then you can adopt qualitative research design. So again, to answer the question, well, how do we choose whether we're going in the direction of qualitative or quantitative, even if we have a certain philosophical background? The answer is it depends on your research question and your study aim and your hypothesis building. Here again, I'm going to, is it the next slide? No, I'll just give you a heads up that we'll be covering hypothesis, and this was a question as well, that does qualitative research have a hypothesis building? And not in the conventional sense that is used with quantitative research, but yes, we do consider what hypothesis is being suggested by literature. This is because no research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, is complete without the literature review. And if literature review is suggesting a certain hypothesis, then qualitative researchers are ethically bound to actually talk about those hypotheses. It doesn't mean that they are going into the field to prove or disprove that hypothesis, but that they've given and richly shared all the background information that they have for the reader and the audience. We'll cover that a little bit later. This is a question that people usually get confused about. There's nothing much to get confused about. I'm not sure how many students there are over here. With quantitative research, we take a deductive reasoning approach. And with qualitative research, we take inductive reasoning. And the simple explanation for this is that with quantitative research, we go into the literature review, pick a hypothesis and a theoretical framework, and then go into the field to collect data to test that hypothesis. And so that's called deductive reasoning. But with qualitative research, we do the literature review, we write about the background, but we don't go into the field to with a hypothesis and a theoretical background that we're trying to prove or disprove. In fact, we go into the field to collect data to generate a new theory. This is also known as grounded theory, i.e. deriving theories from the data that we have collected. And what's important in this figure over here is this little cycle from 4, 5, 5A to 5B. You'll notice that when qualitative researchers collect their first round of data and they start interpreting data and they start creating thematic analysis, and they feel that some theory is emerging, they might then specify their, further specify their research question a little further. I'll give you an example. They go into the field to the research question. Qualitative research was what are the experiences of corporal punishment in child laborers with specific context to their employers. And then you go into the field and you realize that all the let's say six children that you've been talking to are not really only talking about the punishment that they face from, or abuse that they face from their employers, but they're talking a lot about their parents as well. And they're also talking about the relationship between their parents and their employers, that they know each other, and that the parents are also saying that, yeah, my child is naughty, you also give him a whack, I'll also give him a whack, and we'll bring him onto track. And you think that now this is a theme that has to be delved into a little bit more, otherwise it'll be unethical, or your research will be incomplete. So you have another tighter specific research question, i.e. going back and asking questions from the same participants and more participants if possible, related to the corporal punishment and the abuse that they may face from their parents as well. And so then you go back and collect further data, and it's a cycle. So with qualitative research, and this is something that we as supervisors are very guilty of, we usually try to, if there's a timeline for our students and they have to graduate within a specific period and they have to complete a thesis course within a specific period, we try to take them away from qualitative research, especially at the undergraduate level when they may have only 3 months. Because we know that it takes much longer time, and the data analysis process can be, and in fact ethnographers will go into the field and they'll be researching for 10-15 years, and they'll still feel that they have to go back and repeat this cycle as more and more data is being generated. And that's also the beauty of qualitative research. So I'll move forward about hypothesis generation and cover the second part of the slide. Just to clarify that this confusion should not exist, qualitative researchers also use a hypothesis. However, they do not try to test the hypothesis. They use those hypotheses from literature review and they refer to it as working hypothesis or non-testable hypothesis. So they use it, for example, to develop their semi-structured questionnaire, their prompts, in the field, but they don't necessarily target to, and they don't definitely target to prove or disprove that hypothesis. It's just there to help them. They do the literature review related to it. They use it in their semi-structured questionnaire. They keep a hold of it later on as well when they want to bring it back into the discussion and the implications when they're doing the write-up of their findings. But they don't necessarily try to prove or disprove it. In fact, they're trying to go in any and more directions and discover more data altogether. So some more definitions: phenomenological approach, action research versus flexibility. So we know that in case somebody isn't familiar, phenomenological approach is basically to study phenomena as it is experienced and perceived by the participant. And again, with qualitative research, what's important is not to bracket people and not to group them together, but to recognize that each individual has their own experiences, their own interpretation of meanings, and their own vision and understanding of life. And so we need to understand from their perspective instead of assuming or categorizing or generalizing. And that even if you interview that same participant or observe them 1 year later, 3 months later, you should be ready to be ready that the findings may be completely different altogether because their life might have changed. That's the basic ethic of phenomena-based approach for qualitative research. And one example of this is that, you know, somebody that you interview today may be a graduate and they may be very hopeful for their future. But if you interview them 1 year later, something may have drastically changed in their lives, that their responses may be completely different. Their self-esteem may not be that great because they haven't got their job. Maybe they've lost a loved one, and it could be vice versa as well. So what's action research? Action research is defined as an approach in which the action researcher and members of a social setting work together. They become partners. They diagnose a problem in the community setting or in the region, and then they develop a solution based on the diagnosis, and they work closely together to deliver an intervention or an improvement, and then they assess whether an impact has been made, whether it's positive, are there any negative influences, etc. So for example, you go into the community and you work together for a greenery project and for climate change, and you see how the community and the researchers have worked together to plant trees, whether it's been beneficial, whether it has had other benefits, like for example taking the youth away and the community members away from social media, making them more physically active. Has it possibly had any negative effects, like when community members were working together, there were common thefts that were occurring because of poverty, and what kind of other data is emerging. It's really interesting and it's endless really. Same with action research. You'll find that people have been doing action research for many years and developing many theories and developing many areas from that because they've found that from one problem another set of problems is emerging, or from one intervention another set of benefits are emerging. So they need to curtail, reform, improve their intervention, change it altogether, and deliver it again. So it becomes like an endless cycle as well. So what's flexibility in research? This is basically the employment of multiple qualitative tools and also adopting a realist approach of hybrid research. This is also known as mixed methods research. It's also known as triangulation. It's something that I commonly do. I have not yet done a research project which doesn't include both quantitative research methods and qualitative research methods. Of course, it's the best way to go. However, number one, some of the limitations are that it's time consuming. Another is that you need to have an interdisciplinary team. So a lot of people need to work together. Sometimes people have time issues. And I've noticed that with such flexibility, you need to not just work with colleagues, but you need to work with friends as well who will stand by you. Another problem with multi-methods research or mixed methods research is that it tends to be more costly. In the planning also, it's more time consuming, and then it's obviously more costly because you're not just collecting a quantitative data and collecting baseline or cross-sectional research and your work is done or your money is finished, but then you have to have more money for the qualitative research and for data collectors to give them money for travel and transport, for repeat interviews, etc., and so on. Okay, so some more about reflexivity and the flexible process and how Qualitative research has the benefit of going back and forth and repeating patterns and repeating the cycle of research to generate richer and richer data. So I'm just going to, because of time, and we can come back to this slide if we have some more time, is the circle, the 1125, we're okay, is the circle diagram on the side, for me, the right bottom corner. So this is reflexive thinking. What happens with qualitative research is that we start with interviewing a participant if we're doing one-on-one interviews, okay? Let's say we're doing one-on-one interviews. And then we think about, and then the researcher has to be very cognizant and aware and trained. In many cases, if we're talking about our students, we need to at least give them 2 to 3 months training about what qualitative research is, what the researcher ethics should be like, how they should remain impartial and objective, and how they have to go in to generate data from the participant instead of leading the questions and the answers. So we're targeting to understand what the participant is feeling, thinking at the time. And what we have to recognize over here is that we have that person is a human being, so they may be carrying baggage. They may have certain assumptions for political background, values, ethics, which religion, or if they are following any religion, what their cultural background is, which community they belong to, which ethnicity they belong to. In Pakistan, this is much more complex. Which ethnicity will they belong to, which province they belong to, what's their mother tongue, do they have citizenship status, are they a migrant, and that doesn't mean just from another country, but from rural to urban, urban to rural, vice versa. Do they have a refugee status? Are they a religious minority? All of these backgrounds. So now we'll stop for a second and I'll give an example. What this means, acknowledge your participant baggage. It means that, let's say I'm interviewing university students, but one university student is from FC College is from Punjab, and another one is from Balochistan. We as researchers have to understand that they may have different baggage. One of those baggages is that they may come from different educational institutes. One may come from a public sector, and from a primary secondary schooling from Balochistan, where the teachers' quality and skill development was not that great, the administration surveillance was not that great, maybe the electricity and the home background was not that great, they didn't have a separate room to study, maybe they have language barriers and they're speaking in restricted code, which affects their CPGA, which affects their participation in classes, their attendance, their retention, all of these things. Vice versa, somebody from Punjab who studied in a private sector, their baggage, the way that they respond, the way that they talk to us will all be different. And this is something that we have to work on as researchers. How will we prompt a person from a different background? Do we need to translate our survey? Do we need to bring, if our Urdu is not so good, do we need to bring in somebody and in our team to talk to that person in Urdu or their provincial language to get richer data? These are some of the questions that we have to ask. And those are the only examples that we have the time for. But again, we can come back to this. What influence might this have on my findings? Do I, as a researcher, have a bias that I'm sampling 5 people from Punjab and only 1 person from minority population backgrounds? And does that mean that my findings are just not generalizable? Because this is something that is very important for qualitative research, as we'll see in the coming slides. And based on this, when we do our complete our first cycle or our initial data collection, and we recognize that there are some limitations and there are some problems, then we can maybe change our sampling frame a little bit, pull in somebody else, translate our survey, include some more questions. And this is the freedom and the richness of qualitative research, that you'll notice that people may change their surveys and they may develop questions and they may develop prompts after the 5th interview or after the 10th interview or after the 15th interview, but then they will share this honestly with the audience as well, or the reader, when they're sharing their research. So now I believe the most important thing, and as an editor, my experience for qualitative research submissions in Pakistan, which I'm sad to share, is that there is no methodological section related to ethics, authenticity, and trustworthiness. And this is absolutely essential. So we take it for granted that when we're writing up a quantitative research, we talk about ethics and reliability and validity and Cronbach alpha and factor analysis. But then we do qualitative research and we're not writing anything because we've actually not drafted it at a proposal stage. So before you start your qualitative research, please think very carefully that the reliability of qualitative research is important. It's a scientific journey. It's not just random, and we have to, and we and we have to take care of the following things that we're going to discuss in the next couple of minutes. So with meeting criteria for authenticity, we have to be careful about fairness, i.e. do we have fair representation of different viewpoints among members of the social setting. So again, if we're interviewing people from the university and we believe that there are 30% marginalized populations, then our sample should reflect. So let's say we're having only 10 qualitative interviews, but at least 2 to 4 of those participants should be from the minority population areas or minority provinces. Ontological authenticity. This is when you assist researchers and members to arrive at a better understanding of the social environment. So every qualitative researcher's aim or research question and the final findings that are presented to the audience must have some improvement. I remember my supervisor, may he be granted heaven, Hafiz Saab, used to say, if you want to do research on your hearing and how pretty it looks, how is that going to help us? And sometimes we, I mean, as funny as it sounds, sometimes we end up doing research which serves no purpose to our community, to our nation. And as researchers for Pakistan, we really, number one, need to grow research, do more research. And but number two, also our research should have a social objective to ameliorate some kind of a problem that exists in our society. Then educative authenticity, we must be helping researchers and our other and our scholars, colleagues, and our students to better appreciate perspectives of other members of their social setting. So one of our research aims should be obviously that we are highlighting the problems related to another community. I just submitted an article related to the Hazara Shia community, and somebody wrote back and they said that why, like, there's no problem related to them. And I'm quoting away and I'm quoting statistics, and they said that no, why don't you write about South Punjab, the problems that the South Punjabis are facing. So this is immediately, I'm not going to get into a debate with such a person because their orientation is that they're not educated about educative authenticity, or that every member of our social setting or our nation in Pakistan deserves some kind of attention and research focus. So if somebody is working on the minority populations in South Punjab, then somebody's got to work on Hazara Shias as well, and you have to give all those researchers and all those communities equal respect. Catalytic authenticity, it must act as an impetus for members to engage in action to change circumstances. So not every researcher actually engages in action research. I'm an example that most of the time I will do the research, but I will really be careful about how much time I can invest in intervention. But the purpose of each research that I'm disseminating, especially in the recommendation section, must imply some kind of intervention and action that other researchers or other students can take up in the future. So that is something that we should be writing about in our significant section of our proposal, but then also in our final findings. And then depending on your social circumstances, I can understand that mothers and wives will take part in less action and intervention-based research, but we need to do it at least once or twice in our lifetime. And tactical authenticity, this is the ethic that when you are conducting qualitative research, you must empower members to take steps for engaging in action, even if it is just to further the same research in the future or elaborate on the same research or broaden the horizon. Let's say your research was about the causes of poverty, and you've interviewed and sampled 50 impoverished, debt-ridden women. But then you should be able to leave a suggestion for future researchers to talk about other debt-ridden populations and not just women, maybe the transgender community. And then it's a cycle that repeats. And then other researchers get attracted, and then they also want to take up research because they identify gaps. So another way to talk about tactical authenticity as well is that when you finish your write-up, in your limitations or whatever section, your discussion section or your recommendation section, talk about your own gaps. That this is what I could not do, but this is what I recommend future researchers or even myself with a bigger team to do in the future. And then trustworthiness, again, can't say enough about this. It's very important to meet the 4 criteria for trustworthiness in qualitative research when you're drafting it and when you're collecting the data and when you're writing the results. Credibility, you should need to have respondent validation and triangulation. This just means that it's a good idea to have as many researchers as possible. Let's say I'm working on Hazara Shia project and I believe that I'm a Shia and I might have some objective bias. So immediately go and approach colleagues who are non-Shias, who don't, maybe somebody who's from out of Pakistan altogether. And then if I'm concentrating on the qualitative element, I'll ask the statistician to be involved so that they can also they can focus on the quantitative side, and that's respondent validation and researcher triangulation. And respondent validation specifically is that when I draft my results, before I share it with the world, I share it with the respondents or the participants who participated in the research. And maybe sometimes I don't share it back with them, but I share with other participants from that other population group members from that setting who did not participate in the research, and also maybe with senior colleagues, because then they will give feedback. And this is a journey that is very important. I've noticed that when I write up my findings and then I have my independent discussion with my other colleagues or co-authors and with participants who participated in the study, I'm able to refine the findings a little bit more, broaden them. Maybe there's a finding that I neglected altogether and I said it's not important, only one participant talked about it. But then later I realized that even if only one participant talked about it, it is an important finding and needs to be included in the data. Transferability, this is the use of thick description and rich details, i.e. collect as much data as possible. If the participant is willing, have 4 to 5 sessions with them if possible, so that you can then have a proper phase of thematic analysis and data extraction. Because if you don't have enough data, then you're not going to be able to transfer that data into anything meaningful. Dependability, use an audit, whether it's your audit committee in your university, whether it's your department, whether it's senior colleagues, whether it's a funding body, but somebody should be auditing and you should be keeping auditing track sheets. That's something, if Dr. Ruxana is listening, is again, because somebody had asked this question, it's a separate session altogether. You cannot talk about, like, my audit sheets are in Excel. I don't have the software to do monitoring through a software that you have to pay for, but I use an Excel auditing sheet in which I have my data, and then I have my track of training, and then I have my track of the pictures and the videos, and so on and so on. So that is something that would require another session altogether. And then finally, conformability. This is your personal values or theoretical inclinations of the researcher, i.e. that your personal inclinations should not be part of your data collection process or your data analysis. And the best way to cover this is to have 2 different data collectors, and then at least 2, and then 2 different independent data analysts who take the data and independently analyze it and then have a meeting to share their themes. And sometimes the most amazing things happen, like this has happened with me, that I've independently analyzed data and come up with, let's say, 10 themes, and my colleague has independently analyzed data without us talking to each other, and they've come up with only 5 themes. And then we've had a meeting, and I've realized that my 10 could be collapsed into 8, and she's realized that her 5 could have been expanded into 8. And we reach a better conclusion, which is more objective and impartial. And then you can actually take that to a third scholar and ask them that here's the data, you analyze this independently and tell us, and then we see whether they come to 8 or 5 or 10 and what happens. And so you should always leave enough time for data analysis. This is a problem that we have as researchers, because we're under pressure to publish, and as students, we're under pressure to submit our thesis and get our degree. And so we leave the data analysis to the last. I have students who say that we did data analysis in 1 day. And that just means that conformability is low. Transferability is not the best. Dependability low. Credibility low as well. And it's only when we start writing about this in our methodology and then confirming it in our discussion section about how we have confirmed all of these elements and to what extent we've been able to confirm them, and then honestly reporting our limitations as well, is when we will go forward in being able to. And that was another question from a participant, well, how do we publish an impact factor international journals? When you're not going to be able to publish an impact factor international journals when they realize that you've not even written sections related to authenticity and trustworthiness, at least not in today's age. I do know the students have come back to me and they've quoted articles from 1981 and 1996 and 2003, and they say, ma'am, they're not talking about qualitative research and reliability. but the world that we're living in now is that they are talking about it, and we have to take it into consideration. So this is the onion approach, which also helps us to zoom in. So you see the outer ring is basically our philosophy. Are we a positivist, which will obviously take us towards quantitative research, or are we an interpretivist, which will take us to qualitative research? And then as you go closer into the rings or smaller, or closer to the center, you'll see that it's the philosophical approach versus the actual tools that we'll use for the data collection. And the last is what kind of data analysis technique that we will use. Now, there is a linkage between you can see the two extreme columns, method and data analysis. So let's say you've used an ethnographic approach. Usually people who are ethnographers or ethnographic researchers, they end up using thematic analysis. And phenomenological researchers also use thematic analysis. Case study researchers also use thematic analysis. Usually narrative researchers use narrative analysis, and action researchers use discourse or framework analysis. Now, having said this, when you start reading articles, qualitative research, you'll also notice ethnographers using content analysis or narrative analysis. So again, it depends on the type of data that you have. So let's say one ethnographer only has participant observation notes versus another ethnographer who has participant observation notes, but also qualitative interviews and also focus group discussions. So they may use another kind of data analysis technique that suits the data that they have ended up with. So this is a guide, but it doesn't mean that you have to stick to this necessarily, and you find scholars going in other directions as well. So what are the kind of sampling techniques? Before we talk a little bit more about the analysis, is there can be typical case sampling. And this is known as, let's say, because we were talking about the same example previously, so we'll continue in that direction. Let's say we want to interview surgeons. So typical case sampling just means that we actually go into the field and only approach surgeons, let's say, and we want to do it in a very systematic manner. So we approach PMDC and we ask them for the list of physicians across Pakistan, and we take different cities across Pakistan that we want, different provinces that we want to sample, and we approach public sector physicians and we contact them, or we email them, or that we WhatsApp them, and we see who gets back to us. And that's typical case sampling. Then there's snowball sampling. This is network sampling. So let's say we're studying with a transgender community member, but we want to interview at least 20 of them, but there's only one in our university. So we ask them to refer us to another 19 participants. So that's snowball, also known as network sampling. And then there's extreme or deviant case sampling. So, you must have heard of government officers or officers actually going in to sample deviant cases or youth who've been engaged in juvenile delinquency. Then there's maximum variation sampling. This is where, and a lot of people say this is a little bit a qualitative approach towards random sampling, where you try to sample every province or every region or every community or every strata or every age group. So a lot of students will try to explain we try to adopt maximum variation sampling by saying that they qualitatively interviewed at least 3 participants from every year and from every faculty. So first year, second year, third year for the undergraduate students, and then the life sciences and social sciences and humanities and the business studies. So that's, you're trying to get a wider sample and people from all kinds of backgrounds. And theoretical sampling, this is ongoing data collection until you reach theoretical saturation point. So your aim was to generate a theory, but you haven't been able to generate it. So you keep collecting data, pausing, doing data analysis, realizing you need more data, then returning to the field and collecting data until you reach a point where you feel you have enough to create a theory that's meaningful and generalizable. So one example for content or thematic analysis, also known as thematic analysis. I've tried to quote, if you concentrate on the first 2 columns, this is the broader theme and the smaller theme. But what I also wanted you all to recognize is that when you have a lot of qualitative data, so I basically had qualitative data from 442 participants. So here it became important to quote the frequency and the percentage as well, because it made the data analysis and the reporting of the results richer. And it made people understand that, look, the people who are talking about economics and poverty are 76% out of the 442. And the participants who are facing problems related to health delivery access to health centers are 85%, as opposed to participants who are accessing health or maternal health care who are only less than half at 41.6%. And this makes sense because though the sample was women participants, only a few of them were of the had recently had pregnancies or were pregnant. And so the lesser people had talked about this problem. So how does this thematical analysis happen? And this is how I reported the demographic characteristics in a qualitative article. And this is basically how. What we do basically in qualitative research, and some of you might have done it, but basically is we take our interviews, transfer them into Microsoft Word, and start naming them: participant 1, participant 2, participant 3. We'll talk a bit about NVio later, but let's say we're doing manual coding at the moment. And then we start, so what I do is that what most researchers do is that we start transferring them in Word and saving them, but then also transferring them into Excel. So each tab in Excel will be one participant's data. And then we'll start color coding. So let's say I find that access is a theme that is occurring repetitively. And so I start coloring access as dark green. And because I want to have a sub-theme as well, I start coloring different aspects under the broad theme of different sub-themes really under the broad theme of access in a lighter shade of green. And you can see then under access, I have different kinds of access issues: access to health center versus access for maternal health. And some of the examples of this is that one respondent, you can see respondent 1 is saying, well, my health center is too far away from me. Another respondent that's named participant 007 is saying the health centers should be close so that we can commit to regular visitation. Another one is saying, well, C006, that the medicines are very expensive, so we don't approach the health service or the BHU center. And that's basically it. Now, another thing that I have to share over here is that students tend to come back and they say, well, the data was too much and we didn't spend any time with it. Go back to the same example that I was giving you, that I did data analysis in one day. Data analysis should take you nearly the same time or maybe less. I mean, unless you've done a 15-year research for data collection, but it should take you the same time, or you should be giving it the same attention as data collection. Because if your data analysis, if you have not invested time and energy in your data analysis, then your results are going to be poor. All that data collection will have been wasted. And this is where triangulation of researchers is important. So if you feel that you might not do a great job or you don't have time, then you have to bring in colleagues who are going to do it independently or do it with you or do it for you. But don't neglect this area. And this is also related to the question that people are asking. We do a lot of qualitative research, but it doesn't get published. Well, it's not getting published, not maybe because your data has not been collected properly, or your ethics and your scientific credibility has not been maintained. But even if you have rich data, then you have not analyzed it in an adequate manner that it's of any value to people when they're reading it. So the time spent on this is up to you. No trainer, no supervisor, and no colleague can actually help you. They can only guide you. But you need to look at data, and there's another thing that our supervisor, Fisa, used to tell us: you need to look at data from all directions, and you need to spend time with it, and you need to hold it tight, and you need to, invest a lot of energy in it. So one of the last few things that we'll talk about is the Elsevier checklist for qualitative submissions. You may find other checklists as well. This is a checklist that, again, you hold very close to your heart, not when you're drafting your results or drafting your final paper, but this should be before you're drafting your proposal. And there are different domains. So they will be asking you for research term and reflexivity and the exact page number that you're reporting it. You can actually fill this in for your proposal and then later for your final results. Another domain is the study design. And these are all the details that you can please read. If we have the time in the end, we can come back to this. And then there's another domain, the analysis and findings. So a little bit more about NVio. Remember to create your files like this. Each interview that you transcribe into Microsoft Word should be the same. The questions should be the same. The answer order should be the same. And then when you open NVio, you can transfer the files in. You can see on the screen that all these Word files, all the respondents, participants' Word files are being entered. And so the documents are loaded, and then you can use different functions on NVio. You can either ask NVio to use frequency button and tell you which words and themes are coming up, cropping up commonly, which will help you. I mean, NVio can be used simultaneously with manual coding. I always use both. So there's no need to panic also. Feedback form has ended. Okay. Has started. Is my time up, Gohar? So should I skip NVio? Hello?
Sara, may I suggest that we will do the polling, but please continue. I will continue because we have time, and
Okay.
some of participants might stay on. And so we'll try to cover as much as you're comfortable with, and don't worry about the time. We have another 10 minutes easily. But the polling in good time means before participants start leaving, then we have a comprehensive result.
Right. So if participants are leaving, please remember that the presentation and all the references and all the reading material will be sent to you through Gohar or Anish. But just to let you know that NVio allows you to either create notes and themes yourself. So for example, you can create themes of access, quality, service, or you can actually ask NVio to help you to develop themes. And again, that has to be a separate session, a training on NVio. I can't, even though the question said, please train us on the software, we can't do that in this. And one last thing that I wanted to tell you, that qualitative research is not just about the analysis of text, but it can also be the analysis of observational behavior, which is very important. Ethnographers tell us that we usually neglect to cover this. And we did a research and an intervention in old age homes where we developed an observational tool just to measure people's expressions and whether they were happy and whether they were smiling. And this is just to give importance to or just to give recognition that it's not necessarily how people speak, because they will share a lot of information by their gestures or their expressions, and we need to accommodate that. You can have separate observational tools. You can develop them. There are standardized ones available. This is one that we developed, myself, a psychologist, and Madam Khadija Burhan, who's from education. And we had a great time. We were able to publish this, and this is how we published the findings through quantitatively in a qualitative paper. So that was very interesting. The last thing for today is 2-3 people asked us about publication tips. So this is the link for the local approved journals. And when you open this site, it basically prompts you that here are the national journals, international journals. When you click on them, like let's say if you click on the national journals, you'll see the different areas. So you can go into social sciences, natural sciences, and you have to look for the journal that's appropriate. And then you have to read the journal requirements, because then they will ask you or prompt you for different word count and different formatting. And then this is a list of the latest JCR report for the international approved journals or impact factor journals, where you can easily, confidently submit your papers, because HEC will recognize them as well. And finally, this is the AJRS site for HEC, where you can type in a journal name, and this will immediately alert you whether it's approved by HEC or not, or whether it's a predator journal. I mean, it's just going to say it's approved or recognized versus it's not there in the system. If it's not there in the system, please, if it's not there in the system, then please don't apply, don't submit to that journal. It's as simple as that. Right. And these are my references. Thank you, everybody. We can go back.
Sara, we have a couple of questions though that came up in the chat. Do you have time?
Yes, I do. Rita, I have a conference.
We will end the poll. I would kindly request you all to poll if you haven't. We see that out of 125 participants, only 77 have responded. May we kindly request you to please state your comments on the poll. It helps us in refining our sessions, and we will close it in the next few seconds. I see that there are only 77. We seem not to have any more results coming in, so I'll try to close it and go back to the questions. Sarah, there were two questions. One was about a conceptual framework, and that I thought was very effective because you did write a cyclical on the types of qualitative methodologies and how each pans out as we go further in those areas. So I think that in my mind, a framework would be the path that you follow, and you will develop your own framework given the wider context of qualitative research methods and methodology. But please do clarify. And there's another question is, how do you determine a sample size? And so these are two questions for you to respond to.
Okay, so the first is, I think we're talking about this, and people feel that qualitative research should not have a framework, and that's not true. Qualitative research must have a framework, and that comes from the literature review. And you should always have a semi-structured questionnaire, if you're doing interviews or focus group discussion. And if you have participation, observation, if you're doing participant observation notes and you're not conducting interviews and FGTs, then it's very important again for you to have thematic notes heading areas, so that you know that, let's say like you're going in for participant observation and the framework is that I'm going to be observing, I just showed you an observation checklist, I'm going to be observing their expressions, I'm going to be observing their inter-team dynamics, how they deal with colleagues. The third area is how they are dealing with their patients or their clients. And so that framework exists to guide you in a scientific manner. Qualitative research is also science. So to say that we're not going to have a framework, and that framework has to, where does it come from? It comes from your literature review. And we've talked about a working hypothesis or a non-testable hypothesis. Let's say you're working on a very popular topic and you've got 10 hypotheses being generated from your literature review. You use that for your semi-structured qualitative interview. And the second question is sampling. Qualitative research has this, they say, benefit versus limitation. If you want to talk about it as a limitation, then there's no search, sample formula that we use. But at the same time, you go to your research, the benefit is that you go to your research question and you tailor your responses based on saturation point. You take a look at how many interviews will give you the information required to satisfy your research question. And that is why sometimes when you read qualitative research and there are only 4 participants and the author and the editors are very happy to share that research with you because the answers have been justified. The research questions have been answered as much as possible. Having said that, most qualitative researchers and quantitative now share in their limitations, that this was a cross-sectional research at a point of time, or this was an ethnographic research over a 5-year period. This is the data that we were able to collect. However, much more data could be revealed by other researchers or when data is collected at another point of time. So qualitative research is by definition is rich based on the individual that they've collected data from at that certain point of time, and not necessarily based on how many numbers you're collecting data from. I hope that makes sense as well.
Okay. Yeah, there's 2 more questions. How do you develop interview questions out of research questions? And that's kind of got me lost. If you understand what it means, then please do explain. And there is also one from Sara about negative analysis. And there was another one which talked about backcasting exercise. And that's a term I haven't heard. If you have heard, what is backcasting? Is it one of the qualitative methods? Because I do not recall it, or if this will be something new that I'm hearing about.
What was the second one? Negative interviews or
negative case analysis or negative analysis?
Okay, negative case analysis. So here's the example of a research question. You obviously do qualitative research not because you want a publication, but you have a research question. So let's say the research question is, what are the experiences of physicians working in Pakistani hospitals? Now, what are your keywords when you, so what's the first thing that you do when you have a research question? You do a literature review. How do you do a literature review? Let's say you go into an academic search engine, let's say we go into Google Scholar, and we paste in our keywords, physicians, Pakistan, public, private, hospital, PDF, and we start reading articles. That's another problem that people have. And that is we don't do adequate literature review and we just launch in to collect data. So once you read, so when you type physician, so another very important element is that once you've got a research question, and you may want to define it later during your literature review process, you should divide your literature review between international research and local research. So in the first, you may want to type Pakistan for local research literature review, and then without Pakistan. You find 100 articles from international. Let's say you do a time span in only articles published in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, you'll find 100 articles from the international community and maybe about 20 articles from the local community. You need to then keep an Excel sheet, report all those 120 studies, and then I use a literature review template, which prompts me what's the APA citation, what is the study about, what kind of qualitative analysis have they used, what are the findings, and what are the recommendations. You may want to add to that what are the study aims, what kind of, how many sample members, whatever you want to add. And then once your 120 studies have been reviewed, questions will be generated. One example of that is physicians working in Pakistani hospitals tend to have low salary and that leads to dissatisfaction. That's a semi-structured questionnaire. So you're not going to ask them, it's not a quantitative survey. Do you feel that your survey is low? Are you happy with your survey? You'll ask them, share something about your salary structure. Share something about your workplace. Share something about your organizational culture. And then you will have the data. This is a public sector physician versus a private sector physician. The public sector physician tends to be talking a bit more negatively compared to the public sector, but that comes at the analysis stage. But your questions are generated from your literature review. That's basic. I hope that answers the question. Negative case analysis is, we just covered this. One way to basically avoid this is to have triangulation in researchers. Have different people analyzing your data independently and making sure that if there is a bias, not getting involved in that bias and remaining as objective as possible. Maybe not even doing the research if you think you're too close and too biased, and asking another, handing over your proposal and your questionnaire to another researcher. Researchers who are very sensible do this. They may go ahead with the research, they may design an open semi-structured questionnaire and they share it with their seniors or with their colleagues who are objective. And they say, well, tell me, this has happened with me. So my supervisor will tell me, or Dr. Sitandar, the dean, will say, no, take out this word genocide, take out this word exploitation, and instead rephrase it in another way, so that you're not leading. You're already assuming that these people are facing exploitation. And I'll argue and I'll say, oh, come on, they're the transgender community, of course they're facing exploitation. And they'll say, no, still rephrase it. So that's another way to avoid negative cast analysis. And I'm sorry, Dr. Ruxana, I don't know what bad casting is. I don't know what they mean. Can they elaborate a little bit? Because maybe it's something that has another name as well.
Yes. I would request, I think, who talked about backcasting. We'll ask you to please unmute, and if you could rephrase your question. I don't see a response.
I don't see it on Google as well for qualitative.
Yeah, I tried to check it, and neither did I. So
maybe
it is in
name. Yeah, maybe another name. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another question. Please come back to us if you would like to explain more about backcasting. Sample size, we just discussed how to do a sample size, and I think it would be unfair to go back to it when there's a couple of other questions. Maybe I don't understand. Nazish Idris says it is okay, it is in review. Maybe that's different. You are saying that backcasting is a review option and not in qualitative research methodology thing. Is that what you're trying to say? There was one more question which how many interviews I think you talked about the sample size, and the same would apply. Now, how many interviews are okay, minimum to maximum? And I don't think there's ever a minimum or a maximum, but you did explain the parameters of how to devise a sample. And I think the same would apply to an interview research method. Yes, it is used in reviews. That's what backcasting is, a term used in reviews that she says. And please do look it up in reviews. And it's good that you brought something to our information. We will also try to look it up and add to our knowledge. If there are any more questions, kindly put them up in the chat, or we will say goodbye.
I have something to share with the reviews because I shared it, I brought it to the table. Let me just share it.
Please.
Reviewers can be ruthless, stop share, sorry. Sometimes they don't really fall from your background, and they will, sometimes they're being asked by editors to be as, to improve the paper. So they're being very harsh. So
Yeah.
reviewers are, and maybe sometimes one reviewer comes in and is very favorable, and then the editor will ask another reviewer to, for the sake of the reputation of the journal, be a little bit more critical. So that again, they're trying to improve your manuscript. Something that I was taught by my supervisor, that when you're writing your author response, don't take anything personally. Thank them. Say thank you for your time, thank you for your detailed review, thank you for your suggestions, and then very politely you can we can discuss one. Let's say, furthermore, the reviewer comment number 9 is, it's questionable if the problem, like for example, problems with hospital administration and low salary, are really problems related to COVID-19. Now, see what they're saying. This is a theme that we've developed, that in COVID-19, during the pandemic, the ODPs were being asked to work extra hours, and having a low salary even from before, and then not being further compensated for the extra hours and the time pressure and working in a pandemic was causing them demotivation. But the reviewer is telling me, hey, no, that shouldn't matter, and it has nothing to do with COVID. So I'm going to respond by saying, and maybe this is what you mean by bad casting or a very bad review. So I'm saying, dear review. So I respond by saying, dear reviewer, we respect your comments and opinion. However, we refer you again to our secondary aim of the study. And then the secondary aim is to use empirical evidence to inform public health sector about both ODP professional development and improvement in emergency surgical procedures. So it's important to recognize that optimal service delivery in ODPs and other healthcare practitioners is unequivocally linked to the relationship with administration and remuneration equity. In short, I can't read the whole answer. So this is again an interaction that you have to be. I'll stop share over here so I can see you, see all of you. I'm not sure who asked the question, but we have to take it with a pinch of salt, and we have to go back to our study and say very honestly whether we have an answer. If we have an answer, we honestly and respectfully reply to them. If we don't have an answer, we say simply, like I remember in one review, they said that you did not include this variable. You didn't ask the question related to, yeah, it's in this as well. And this attachment will come to you through Dr. Roxana's office. One of the reviewer asked that, why didn't you interview nurses? So I said that, yes, well, that's excellent. I want to, but I had to focus on one practitioner body. So I chose to interview ODPs. And next time we would be happy to interview nurses as well, because their argument was nurses will give you even more information than ODPs. And then another reviewer comment was that, why are all your participants male? This is not a valid study. So then we had to answer them and say that all the ODPs in Pakistan, majority of them, 98% of them are males, but we have no statistic to share with you because there has been no research published related to them. However, we refer you to their email at emailing PMDC body and health ministry. They will confirm to you through some reports that they have on their desk about the gender weightage of ODPs. Because you see, either I had to quote, if there was a published material, I could have quoted it and said 98% of ODPs in Pakistan are male. But because I didn't have such a report, I had to give an email address of PMDC and health ministry. So we got away. They accepted it because and you have to think of these things. So how to, instead of saying that, well, no, I can't answer this, because this happens. A lot of my colleagues say we got a horrible review, so we just took back our article, and that's a waste of time. Instead, because publication takes 1 year, 2 years, it can take 3 years. I have an article that's stuck for 3 years now, and we're all going through the same problem. So it's better that if you get a review, no matter how bad it is, try to answer the questions. And sometimes they really appreciate, no matter how bad and vicious they may seem, they'll appreciate your honest answer. And they might just tell you to put it as a limitation of your research. And they'll accept the article in the end. I hope that helps as well.
No, I think what you've talked about, citing your limitations at every step of the way, is one of the main ways of convincing that you are aware that those limitations exist and that your questions and your conclusions are in keeping within those limitations. And so I think that's the way you validify your research. And I think it was a beautifully explained session, Sara, if I may say. You kept us captivated. You kept us very in a continuous step-by-step way. You took us along, and I really appreciate. I learned a lot. I think I know, and then I suddenly realized there are lots of things I don't know. And we see that a lot of our participants are still with us. There's still hundreds of them. And they have been very, very thankful for your expose. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your kind comments, and see you again. Musarat, you seem to be attending all the sessions from wherever you are out of the country. So good to have you with us. Okay, dears. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sara. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you.